Hello and welcome to another round of conversations with candidates who are running for council this year. This time it is Karhiio. So let's start with Jason, who was the first in the studio. So, Jason, can you give us a brief intro to what you've been doing and what inspired you to stand for the election this year?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mary. Thanks for having us here. I'm Jason Bale, and I'm running to be the next city councilor for Ward Karhiio. I've been a resident of Mill Woods for over 35 years. It's a community where I grew up. It's a community where I choose to raise my family, and it's a community I will always stand up for. I'm running because I see a disconnect between what people want to see and what our government actually does. I see rising crime, taxes, and unemployment, and these are not new issues. They're just repeatedly neglected. We don't feel heard by the current city council, and I'm looking to change that. As an independent candidate, I'm free to advocate for the interests of the community rather than partisan interests. Unlike the status quo, your opinions are important to me, and that's why my team and I have been out door knocking since December. We've been taking the time to genuinely engage with residents, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of that feedback tonight, as well as answering some questions important to the voters.
Okay, so what is your background? What have you been engaged with?
So I used to be the research assistant for the former city councilor for Ward 11, Mike Nickel. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let me go to Karen, who is the incumbent. So, Karen, I know you previously, so I don't have to really ask you these questions. But for the sake of our audience, can you give us a brief, introduction to your work and what you've been doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much to Ladies Corner, Mary T, and your host team for putting this on. As volunteers, I understand, so that's really important part of the process. So my name is Karen Tang. I'm a first-term counselor, and I look forward to continuing the work that we've started this term. I'm going into, this is my third election, but I ran first time in 2017 for a number of reasons. I believed in stronger representation for a city that's fastly changing and growing. I want to see at the table to influence the local community impact. And I will say 8 years later, a lot of those reasons haven't changed, but we've only seen challenges grow post-pandemic, and I think we've laid a lot of foundations this term to set up for the future, and I will see through some of those work. And above all, in the last few years, especially through the work that my office initiated with community-based budgeting, meeting a lot of residents, youth, young people, newcomers who are leaders in the community, and making small change but big impact. I want to continue to work with residents and continue on that path. So that's why I'm here again, and I look forward to the conversation tonight.
Thank you so much, Karen. Moving to Jyoti. This is probably my first interaction with you, I think. Am I right?
I think so. But I think you used to work a long time ago with Asian Tribune, because I remember the name being very familiar.
Oh, yes.
Yes, back when I was in ethnic media. So a little bit about myself. My name is Jyoti Buttar, and I've worked a long time in government, but I've been in Edmonton about 20 years. I was born in Ontario. I was a senior advisor with the province, working with cultural communities and outreach. And in that role, I worked specifically with marginalized, underrepresented groups and visible minorities, helping them access government resources and programs. I created spaces, town halls, ethnic media interviews with ministers, government officials, helping newcomers, refugees understand our city a little better. And during my time at the province, I worked extensively on the anti-racism plan that's in place, and Fairness for Newcomers Summit, a lot of these programs that advocated for cultural communities. And then for the last year, I've been working with a federal subsidiary on our large infrastructure projects and permitting development and engaging with residences on the ground, with small businesses and Indigenous partners.
How interesting. Wow, that is broad.
Yeah.
Okay. So, my question to Jason would be to kind of tell us what are the personal experiences you've had with, this campaign and going to different places, meeting people. What are the kind of things you're hearing on the ground?
So the number one issue I am hearing loud and clear is about infill and the zoning bylaw, and the second place issue isn't even close. That is the biggest issue that is top of people's minds right now. The second issue is taxes, and it's not just the nearly 30% that this council raised, but when we look at 2021, the typical home paid about 2,600 in taxes. Now they're paying about 4,000. So there's been other policy shifts that have changed that assessment to equate to about an approximate 53% tax increase for the typical homeowner. And then the third is it really varies neighborhood by neighborhood. Some neighborhoods, it's the neighborhood renewal that's important to them. Other neighborhoods, it's maybe a sidewalk in Sakah, for example, is high up on the priority list. Some neighborhoods have issues with encampments or petty break-ins. It really varies neighborhood by neighborhood.
Oh, very interesting. Wow. All right. So, what makes you the ideal candidate to be in this, to be representing Karhiio? What do you think?
Sorry, is this back to me?
Yeah.
So, as the former research assistant for the Ward 11 Council office that I mentioned earlier, I've delivered on a lot of projects that matter to residents. Things like we launched a community policing program. We did that without a council vote, and we got beat officers in the community, and they were stopping dog walkers and talking to them and finding out, what is going on in the community, because nobody knows better than the people who actually walk it every day. And with that, we actually shut down 3 meth labs in the first year with that program. So incredibly successful program. If they saw somebody experiencing homelessness, they would take that, they would observe, and they would call in the appropriate resource to get there, because it's not the police that need to be responding to homelessness. It's help team, it's crisis diversion team, it's somebody else that deals with that. I had expanded the Front Yards and Bloom program when I was there. That was a really great experience with all of that community building, and I successfully advocated for legislation to help protect mobile home owners, and we got it passed in the legislature unanimously. And wonderful experience working across partisan lines.
Thank you so much, Jason. Karen, what are the kind of things that you initiated in your term in council last term?
Yeah, so in the 2021 election, I ran a platform of community, economy, and climate. And I will say, there's been a number of motions and initiatives that I've initiated and directed administration to work on. One of the things that I think is very important to heading into the next term is a violence prevention action plan. I think, over the last few years, we have seen a decrease in violent crime and the crime severity. However, perception of safety continues to linger. And I think that is a major issue when it comes to public safety. And I've also seen a lot of cases involving youth. And so part of why this came about is to make sure that city and institutions like policing, healthcare, schools are working differently in a more coordinated fashion to overall reduce violence. We've seen this work in many other cities, major cities, and this is something that, I would like to see through. On the economic side, Ward Karhiio isn't just exclusive to Millwoods. It's a fairly large award encompassing 100,000 people. And one of the major institutions within the ward is the Edmonton Research Park, which has been languishing for decades. And I think there has been such a lack of underinvestment, of attention, of resource. And that has been something I focused on stimulating. It's in particular, some major pharmaceutical manufacturing sectors. And so kind of stimulating and directing motion conversations, getting stakeholders to work together has been taking a lot of my attention this term, and I'm happy to see the future. And there's a lot of big things coming. And there are a number of advocacy items related to climate action that that I am proud of in terms of advocacy for a $3 billion climate fund with the federal government through a number of provincial and federal municipal associations. I'm also on the board of the Climate Caucus, and this is, again, network and collective advocacy is something I've been focusing on. More locally, I've been working with residents, with people who don't normally step into the civic conversation, and building capacity, bring their ideas to fruition through the community-based budgeting program. We've seen dozens of portfolios of projects scattered throughout the ward. From local, small infrastructure, from benches to small libraries to more activation like transit centers. And this is how we build communities and how we bring people together.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. Moving to Jyoti, what do you think is the main reason why you decided to, stand for council for this ward in particular? And what are the things that your experience can help you advocate for or move forward in?
Sure. I think the main reason that I decided to put my hat in the ring is because I noticed that there was a lot of gaps in the system. Working in across all levels of government, at some point provincial, federal, municipal, I learned about a lot of the issues, and I thought, you know what, I want to do something more front facing and tackle some of these. I learned that newcomers, especially, they don't always know about the programs that exist for them, the resources that exist for them. And some of these resources are there, but they have absolutely no clue that they exist for them. And the language barriers, there's a lot of those that exist as well, right? And this is a very, very diverse ward. So when I was going around and door knocking and talking to people and just engaging with them on the grounds, I learned that in a lot of the areas, there was public engagement happening, but because they weren't reached out to in a language that they understand. So some of the revitalization, for example, in Mill Woods, there was something sent in the mail that said, this project is happening and this is how we're engaging with you, but it's in English. And a lot of the people that live in this ward, they struggle with English. So it needed to be in layman's terms. So for me, I want to be an advocate for the everyday person, everyday Edmontonian. I've worked a lot on, you know, I've worked a lot with cultural organizations to ensure that we're inclusive, the government is inclusive, and as a community, we're inclusive of everyone.
Okay, so just to ask you one more question about that. When you
Yeah.
say diversity, it's not essentially only people of one language. So, what is the demographic distribution of different, ethnicities?
So it's very, very diverse. We've got a huge Filipino population, Punjabi population. There's so many other ethnicities, Gujaratis, so many that live in this ward. And of course, in Edmonton, we're so extremely diverse. I think almost more than half of our population is visible minorities.
So, when you speak to somebody with your language background, maybe
Yes.
you will be able to speak to them in that language. But what about the people who have maybe they are Filipino? So, how do you plan to communicate with them better?
So I think with certain communities, their understanding of English is a little bit different. So because I worked in government with translating into different languages, we learned that Tagalog speakers, their English is actually quite good, so they didn't need as much translated resources compared to some people from certain countries where their level and grasp of English was different, so that they did need translated resources. So Filipino communities actually they speak Tagalog, but in written, even in their own media, they prefer a mix of English because they're very comfortable with English, but certain communities have a more difficult time.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that. Um, so I've heard that there is a lot of problems with, infrastructure and flooding and different other things in Millwoods area. So Jason, what are the kind of things that you are planning to do to deal with these kind of issues?
So with infrastructure, that's largely exaggerated by the amount of infill that's going in. We're putting in all these units. We're giving carte blanche for developers for up to 8 units, and in some cases higher, such as corner lots. But we're not looking to see that the infrastructure can handle it. We don't know how many units that we can add before the power grid starts to give brownouts to the neighboring residents. We don't know how much before we have another flood like we had back in 2012, which was a direct result of we didn't have enough infrastructure to meet the density needs, and then we had a high volume flood, and it went everywhere. And my home was actually one of the homes that flooded with that. So I was proud to take over that project largely when I did work in that office, the big Millwoods Drainage project. But I mean, that was $1 billion, so that was a huge project just by not doing it ahead of time. We did reactive maintenance rather than proactive maintenance.
Wow. Okay. Do you foresee such things happening in other places in your ward?
Absolutely. So we're looking at Greenview right now. There's a development going in. It's a 10-plex. And now those 10 units actually create a tipping point that, because right now Greenview meets its current 16% target for affordable housing. When we add those 10 units, it's going to drop it down to 15%, which means that they're going to need even more development of non-market housing. And so it's creating even more units than just the 10. And EPCOR doesn't have records of how much density the infrastructure can handle. So I know there's other developments going on in that neighborhood too. I know the residents, they actually had their SDAB appeal last week. We're waiting until next week to hear the results, but EPCOR not having those records was one of the issues that they mentioned. So it's just simply a matter of we don't know how much we can handle right now.
Wow. Okay. Do you think there's any learnings that, after treating the previous flood, the administration has transferred to these realtors and developers?
Sorry, is there any learnings from
the last flood? When the last flood happened?
Yeah. Learnings on like how we densify the neighborhood when we transfer that land to
develop. What do you keep in mind, kind of thing? Yeah.
So what I'd like to see is each neighborhood going through a single study of, okay, how many units can we add? Where can we add it? So then we're not having each developer submit their own site study for the drainage and electrical grid and passing it on to eventually one developer is going to be that tipping point, and they're going to be responsible for upgrading the whole power grid or the whole sewage grid. But there's some offsite levies to kind of address that a little bit, but it's ultimately going to be one developer's problem once they hit that tipping point. So I'd like to see that done ahead of time so that we know how much we can comfortably and safely densify.
Thank you so much. That's great. All right. So next question goes to Karen. How do you plan to ensure that diverse voices, including the newcomers, Indigenous residents, youth and seniors, are heard in the decision-making process when policies are made about Karhiio?
Yeah, so there was a lot in the previous response that I would love to comment on, but feel free to ask me that next, Mary. I think certainly having more inclusive perspectives in decision making has been something I ran on in the 2021 election. And when I say laying the foundation, I think that has been a huge aspect of this council's work. I'll give you an example. So that prior to being elected, I was involved in community organizing, which meant a wide range of networks and relationships, a variety of projects with very diverse ethnocultural community groups. And I leaned on my experience when I was with the Edmonton Multicultural Coalition, where we had a community animation model, where you really look towards those natural leaders in the community who have the linguistic and cultural knowledge and connection to particular groups of people, and leveraging those connections to elevate the voices. And so, when we had a major rezoning, the citywide zoning bylaw renewal public hearing, we saw probably the most turnout for a public hearing item. And typically we hear mostly people coming out to oppose a redevelopment, but this time we actually saw almost equal number of people opposed and in support, and a number of those people who felt comfortable coming forward, sharing perspective that councillors of 3 terms said they have never heard before were people from the newcomer groups, people from the student groups, the young people, and sharing perspective of why density and 15-minute communities matter to them. And so that didn't come about just out of magic. It came about of some intentional communication, reaching out to different relationships, and so I think that was one area where I made sure the people I knew about this public hearing and had the access to opportunities to participate. And there's been other mechanisms as well, formal and informal. Formal channels we have also, through, for example, an Indigenous Elder Circle through the Indigenous Framework, and those are people we also connect with, and then through the wider network that our Indigenous office has, and of course through our informal interpersonal relationships. When you are representing a ward sometimes bigger than a provincial or even federal riding, sometimes you got to lean on a variety of methods. Because young people are drawn more to social media. I think different generations are, they prefer just in-person coffees, and so that's something I think my team and I have focused on, is a wide range of methods to reach out to people. Yeah.
And what would you measure success with, that they have been engaged well?
I think it's about like who I hear from. When I get a variety of comments in my inbox, I don't just hear from one group of people. I think the variety of perspectives I get, I think is an indication of the type of voices that either feel comfortable, or they're receiving my information to reach out to me, or that they know that I'm accessible, that there's an open communication channel. So I think that's a constant measurement for me to track, and for my team to track. Yeah.
Okay. Do you actually go and speak to people you don't think are leaders?
Yes, of course. And I think, for me, leadership is, sometimes untapped. And when I say natural leaders, they may not be people that's very obvious. And in fact, I will say they're often mothers. They're often, the grandparents in the community who are connected to wider families, for example. So I see those as leaders as well. And I also think it's important to engage people who are perhaps who might not agree. I think when you're an elected leader, you're not just representing those who voted for you, or those who are able to vote, or those who own homes. You're representing everybody, and there's such a wide experience, and that's why I also door knock during the year, so that kind of random sampling, you get a good pulse check on kind of a variety of perspectives.
Thank you so much for that. Because sometimes, it can get very focused on certain individuals, and sometimes they might not be bringing you the entire information. So that's a good, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, and I will agree with that. I think everybody thinks like them, right? And I encounter that narrative a lot. And I will say, I promise you, in my inbox, I certainly do not get one perspective. And I don't think our jobs are necessarily to say one group of people's perspective is more important than another. I think our job is to take everybody's experience and feedback in and consolidate them. And typically what you come out with is somewhere in the middle that doesn't please everybody. So I always tell people my job is not to please anybody. and I actually don't make anybody very happy, because that's the reality of this kind of decision making.
That's true. Okay. So there is a lot of walkability, mobility kind of issues in this ward, where in some other wards there are so many trails and it's so easy to walk, especially in Karhiio. Jyoti, I want you to answer this one because I find that people just go and sit on benches because there's not too many trails, So, um, I just want to ask this question: is there a plan to build a network of trails like many other wards, have at this point?
Yeah. And I think that's because this ward is so diverse. At the northern part of it, when you go to Mill Woods, it's an older community, so it does have trails and it's very well connected to the city. And then when you go south, it's much newer communities. We have Orchards, Hills, Charlesworth, and all of these communities have been built, but they are not even well connected. Not It's not only trails; they're not even well connected through LRT, through ETS in general, through buses, anything like that. So when I've been in those areas and I've been talking to people, that is one of their main things. In Orchards, there is a trail. It is a long trail. It's about a kilometer long, and it has absolutely not even one bench on it. And the seniors in the area said to me, "We're happy to have this one trail. It is the only trail that we have nearby, but we can't sit down halfway because we're elderly, and we can't continue walking the entire way because there is not a bench. So it's almost not even useful for us." So
Hmm.
if we are building trails, we should have those in these newer communities as well. They're much needed. We also need to build them with engagement that's done well with the people that live around there. So having benches on these trails makes a big difference. It makes it easier if it's a young mom and she needs to stop for a second. She has a stroller with her and sit down. She has a child with her. It makes it so much easier if we have trails that are utilized and well planned, and trails that are well lit and all of that as well.
So, is that something that you have in mind for, developing some new road system or having transportation in that area and more trails?
Yes, I feel that that area does need a better connection, some more trails and better transit system connection as well.
All right, thank you. Um, Once we, deal with some of these issues like flooding, stormwater management, and all those concerns that we still have in that ward, what are the key things that you're going to tackle, Jason, other than, of course, property taxes?
Well, and that's just it. There's the big key items that everybody's talking about, but then there's the question of who do you trust for the day after? Who's going to get the snow cleared? Who's going to make sure that the grass is cut? Who's going to ensure that we have those service standards in place that are acceptable to the community? Snow that's cleared before it's melted. Grass that's cut before too many noxious weeds can start to grow, and um, all of those kind of things. And so reviewing those service standards is on my to-do list post election, and taking the feedback from the community on those things, because those are some of the key issues that I am hearing. Uh, but it's zoning bylaw, it's taxes, it's creating more business accounts. How are we going to attract and retain new businesses so that we can increase that assessment growth on the non-residential side? A lot of things like that I'm mindful of and trying to work on.
So there is an issue of unemployment too, right? So is there something that you have on your idea list about developing the economic prosperity of this region?
Yeah, so I know this city thinks that they're business friendly. There's the department that helps walk you through the bureaucracy of getting a business set up. But if you have so much that you need a guide, then you're not business friendly. So I'm looking to Gantt get a Gantt chart of what that process is. What are all the steps along the way? What can we remove? What's arbitrary? What's necessary? So that we can start attracting businesses on that side. Then we need to look at the tax side of things. In a lot of cases, it's about $1.50 per square foot cheaper to do business in the surrounding community than it is in Edmonton. So when you're talking about these warehouses that are tens of thousands of square feet, that makes a huge difference. So there's no simple answer to it. There is we need a deep dive. We need to go through the process, and we need to figure out where are we getting in the way of business, and how can we get out of the way without giving carte blanche to businesses.
Okay, thank you. Karen, when it comes to spaces that people can gather, of course, we have some malls and we have spaces, but when it comes to the cost of acquiring that space that people can gather, Is there any effort to build spaces that are affordable?
Are you talking about recreation spaces? Are you talking about community and cultural hubs? Are you talking about schools? There's spaces like that,
No,
are really throughout.
not really schools. I'm just talking about cultural communities, different cultural communities, when they try to access space. There's been such a paucity of good venues to do things that different cultural communities want to do, like celebrate their culture or come together for a celebratory event in their community or something like that. It's so hard to access space, especially in the Karhiio region. Like, where are the spaces for people to gather other than, of course, Meadows Rec Center maybe, or Millwoods Town Center?
Well, I would say I can tell you, Park Spaces is highly popular, and so popular. I get lots of noise complaints about all the cultural gathering that is there.
Okay.
So that is certainly one of the options. There are a number of public parks where different groups are thinking of activating and doing some community-led construction projects to kind of, I guess, bring about more to bring more of that gathering flavor to those public spaces. I think that this is an issue that has been around for a very long time. Our city is growing. We're seeing emerging ethnocultural communities come forward and wanting, starting to incorporate having their own association. And then the next step is people want their own community hall. Some groups, I think, over the years have been successful in terms of accessing surplus schools. So I'm thinking of like Bent Arrow, for example, the Edmonton Intercultural Center, right? Like leveraging those spaces very effectively, bring different community organizations together in one space to co-locate. And other times, leveraging city land, for example. I'm thinking of the more recent decision around Africa Center, for example. And those opportunities don't just come about overnight. This is through many years of hard work and negotiation and looking for different options to land where we are. So I think that is always the opportunity. I've also seen a lot of cultural communities access market land and fundraising themselves and building spaces. I will always love to see intercultural spaces where different groups, different ethnocultural communities engage, interact, share, co-locate, because I think that's a better and more effective way of using space. And so, I think space, land is always scarce, and there will always be more people, no matter who they are, whether it's ethnocultural. But I'm also hearing lots from, communities. There are a number of community leagues, but not all of them have their own community halls. And so this is kind of the question for the next while, especially for those communities south of the Henday. The population is growing fast, but there's no good gathering grounds for people to come together. They're either renting other halls or they're meeting in outdoors. So that's something I think through the community process. I hope to support them in developing that. And the final thing I'll just say is currently organizations like Arts Habitat is engaging in a cultural infrastructure plan as part of the Connection and Exchanges strategy with the city. And part of the goal there is to actually map out what are some of those spaces, infrastructure for cultural and arts organizations to access. And, if we kind of have, if we know what they are, if people know what the options are, they're more likely to not be left feeling like there's no options. And if there's truly a gap, we need to kind of focus on how can we leverage best in terms of what are some of those opportunities. I will say, city does have, it is in a very difficult financial position where new projects, such as a recreation center. We've been building mega centers for years. It's not a sustainable way moving forward. In fact, I actually didn't support the last mega rec center project during the 4-year budget cycle. I didn't win that vote. It was very close. But I think moving forward is not feasible to continue on that path. And so we need to look at other opportunities to think more holistically about spaces, not just for communities to gather, but housing, public amenities, etc.
Okay, so what you're saying is that is low on your priority list.
I did not say that. I would say that's fairly different than what I said. I would say actually one of my priority that will be on my platform is around how we actually plan better, more holistically. Instead of thinking standalone facilities, how do we leverage opportunities moving forward? I'm very conscious that in my ward, especially community south of the Henday, there is a lack of community gathering space. And so if we can't build standalone, what can we do? And we need to be creative from moving forward.
The reason I'm asking is because I organize an event every year, and I was organizing it at Sherwood Park because it's very reasonably priced. It's state of the art, and in terms of acoustics and everything. And so to find a space like that in Edmonton is so hard. And so this year we've got Orange Hub, which is totally out of my riding and all that. So I just like feel that there should be spaces in the south, so that people in the south don't have to go north or west and other places. So that's the reason why for that question. But as different cultural communities, there are so many different things that people want to celebrate, want to gather together around. Like soon we will be having an Onam celebration. So we are gathering somewhere totally outside our ward because there's no space here that can bring like 500 to 1,000 people together. So so those are real pressing questions, for people to feel the sense of belonging and community.
Absolutely. I mean, different sizes needs to meet different needs of different, venues. And for events like yours that's been there for every year, I imagine it grows in size as well, right? Your need one year could be very different from the next year. And I think it's important to have a variety of options. I feel like I can go on about this because I talk to lots of community groups. I help them find locations, and not all of them are going to be in my ward. But I think it's important for the city as a whole to figure out, well, what options do we have? Kind of around what are those gaps? What are our resources? Everybody, I would love to have a mega venue that will meet the needs for everything. I think we all want that, right? How do you make that happen in a time of constraint and in a time also of the highest demand I've ever seen?
That's true. Yeah, and the housing is surely more pressing than having a space to gather. I'm totally on that with you. When it comes to environment and sustainability, what are the kind of climate goals that we can look at for the next term, Jyoti? And what do you see within your Karhiio communities as a feather in your cap? And what are the things that you need more work on in terms of environment and sustainability?
Thank you for the question, Mary. In terms of environment, some of the projects that are happening in the ward, give me a second, I'm just going to think. To be very honest, I'm kind of blanking out for a second, so just give me a minute to think about that, and I'll come back to it.
Okay. Can I ask you another question then in its place?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. So you have done a lot of work in different areas with federal and provincial and all of those things. So you have some kind of perspective on how these things are conducted and how much transparency is involved in this process. So when you talk about transparency, where do you stand when it comes to decision making, and how much transparency is available to the common citizen in your ward with respect to how decisions are made within your ward?
I don't think there is a lot of transparency available. When I want to look at a project and see where it's at, for example, there's a lot of work happening on 50th Street, and I wanted to go on the city website and kind of search and try to find out what's the time frame of this, or when will this project complete. I know that city dashboards exist and they are trying to work towards transparency, but to actually navigate the website and find the project that you want to find out where it's at or what the time frame of that is or when it's going to finish, it's not easy to navigate. And if it's not easy to navigate for someone like me that has worked in this environment, for the average person, if you're looking for this kind of information, you cannot come across it very easy. So I think we can work on making whatever projects are happening or revitalizations, or if there's a park that we're working on, whatever it is, the time frame around it, how long it's going to take, what's actually happening, to have all of that on a website that's accessible, easy to access, where we can see, metrics of how far they've gotten on the project, what's remaining, all of that. Even transparency for example, when you look at the duplexes that are going up, I was in Millwoods, and there was an eightplex going up, and just on the outside of it, there's usually something on the construction fence. It'll be information on the project that's happening. So it's the city puts up a sign and kind of explains this is what's going up. This is, the details on it. And on that, if you notice, there's nothing about the parking space. It'll be about the number of units going in, and it'll say it's an eightplex or it's this or that, but it doesn't go into too much detail. Even when you go online to try and find it, I don't find that there is the transparency that we need and require, or the engagement that we need and require.
So you're saying that you will ask those questions and you will try to make that
Yes,
happen.
yes. In a
Okay.
lot of different areas, it's lacking all around, I feel.
Okay. So when you work with people on a council, you know that you can have immense difference in the perspectives. And so you might have worked in different units where you've seen a lot of like divergent perspectives. How do you bring them all together to come to one decision?
Yeah, I think it's really important to first of all be respectful of the people that you work with, and it isn't easy sometimes to come to a consensus. And one of the things is having good relationships with your colleagues. That helps as well, understanding one another. One thing that I've heard just in general from other people that I know that work on council, they've said that they've almost never spent time meeting each other outside of council. So they really don't have a good working relationship, and they're making all these decisions together, but yet they don't really spend any time getting to know one another. And that I feel could be a reason for some of the clashes and the delays. And one thing I would want is good working relationships built through spending time getting to know the people that I'm going to be spending a lot of time with. And that could mean outside of the work environments as well. It
Sure.
makes for open communication and better decision making.
Thank you so much. Sure. That really is a very good answer. Thank you so much, Jyoti. So do you think there is a homelessness issue within your ward, Jason? And how are you planning to tackle that?
So, yes, there is a homelessness issue. Yes, it is being visualized in the ward. But I mean, the houselessness problem is everywhere. It's we need to put more houses across the city. That's one approach, is looking at how do we increase the number of units so that we don't have people going or experiencing homelessness due to a shortage. And there's the economic side of things. What happens when we get people into a home? How are they going to pay the rent going forward? Is it going to be perpetually paid for by the government, or do we want to try and help lift people up to pay for it through their own means? There's also a poverty issue too. And so I actually spent about 8 years of my adult life living in affordable housing, and every time that I started to make more money, my rent kept going up accordingly, until eventually they kicked me out for making too much money. But I hadn't had the time to save up money to put a down payment on a house, to put another damage deposit down. So one of the approaches I'm looking for is to look at I think it's 15,000 units of affordable housing currently. Who is in a similar situation like that just needs a little boost to get into market housing to be able to pay for it themselves? Maybe we find none. Maybe we find 20% of them. We don't know until we look. So I'm committed to looking for that kind of stuff, ways that we can address it with existing infrastructure.
So, So how much low-income housing is in your ward at this point?
It varies community by community. Some communities are in the low 20% of the housing is affordable housing. Some are sub 10%. It's off the top of my head, I'd have to say probably in the neighborhood of about 800 to 1,000 units, ballpark. I do have the numbers written down. I just don't have them handy.
Okay. All right. Do you see this problem exacerbating over the next term, or do you see that it's going to be tackled in a nice way?
Absolutely, I see it being exacerbated. One of the issues that we're having with the zoning bylaw is that developers are coming in, they're taking a viable house out of the housing market and turning it into 8 units, and that's great down the road. But for the interim, we don't have that housing flow. We're net negative 1 unit until those additional units come on board, and now it's only 1 unit. Some cases it's 2 units if they have a basement suite. But then when we're talking about 16,000 permits issued, and 50% of them is the target for infill. Now we're talking about thousands of houses being taken out of the housing inventory for months at a time before they're replaced. And so we need to consider that housing flow much like a cash flow in a business. And so that's one of the reasons that I think it's going to get worse. We also aren't expanding beyond the current city boundaries. And I actually wrote a blog recently demonstrating that based on the numbers provided by government websites, it's actually cheaper to expand the city, not quite sprawl, but still expand outside of where we're already building. So with a housing crisis, I don't see why all options aren't on the table.
Very interesting. So Karen, as we are planning to come to the close of this, I wanted to give you time to talk about some of the things I asked other candidates, and you haven't had a chance to pitch in on, and share your perspectives.
Where would you like me to start?
Where you would like to start. That's
so
good.
Maybe I'll touch on a few different things that has come
Sure.
up. I will start with the current housing crisis. For me, it's actually a two-front issues. First, we do have a housing crisis that's compounded by mental health and addiction. I would say that our current provincial recovery strategy is not working for people who are most struggling on the street. And for us at the city, I think there is a lot of efforts put into permanent supportive housing. And in fact, just this last week, we have approved, a number of grants and land sale that will bring our units count up to 3,500 out of a total of the refresh 4,600 unit goals for the 4-year budget cycle, which I think is significant progress, and we need to build on that momentum. And these are housing with staff 24/7, and there's various levels of medical and social care in these facilities. And so I think that kind of strategy remains really critical. I have always advocated for centering on people with lived experience the most. I think we're seeing some of that initiatives coming forward, like peer support, and that was one of the Housing and Houselessness Task Force recommendation. And I think there's a community organization stewarding that. Those are some of the things that I think will keep people housed, because we don't want people cycling through this vicious cycle. So I think that's one end of the spectrum. And I think the other end is housing affordability, which is very different. And I don't conflate the two. I think people do, and they take very different tools. Housing affordability means, in the country right now, as a major city of over 1 million people, we have one of the most affordable housing markets. And that also didn't come about overnight, just out of sheer air. That came out through thoughtful planning, and there was some forward-thinking regulatory changes. Yes, we need to add more units, but the question is always where. I did support the zoning bylaw renewal because there's a number of implications for creating more supply of housing and keeping the city's financial position stable. And creating that supply as a province in Alberta, we do not have measures like rent ceilings that other provinces may have. This has been a huge debate at the legislature, last year. So one of the tools that we have is creating supply through rentals, through multi-unit, through adding additional housing. And we have seen that actually come to fruition, and our rental prices have remained relatively stable. I think at the height of some of the encampment removal, I remember stories of people who were living on the streets or living in the river valley because they were priced out of their rental spaces. So I think that is an issue we need to kind of just make sure that our housing is affordable on both the market and non-market side. It's a whole spectrum. I agree with Jason. I would say property tax is one of the biggest things I'm hearing about. I think in the last 4 years, we've seen some major changes and growth for the city. And I also I want to remind folks, when I first got in, we were still masked. We had separators in council chambers, so separating everybody, because that's kind of the era that we were living in. During that time, previous council had reduced the property tax across the city. This translated into $97 million of public service lost. And I think in the last 4 years, we've been steadily, incrementally making sure that we are restoring that public service and protecting that. Because I can guarantee you that if we maintain the status quo and we kept on the path of service cuts, your snow is for sure not going to be cleared, or your turf is not going to be mowed. So I think protecting that is very important. We've also started the process of making sure we're budgeting more smartly through the results-based budgeting. That process has started for the next 4-year budget cycle. And I think finally, we can talk all about budget and service reduction all we want, but if we don't expand the tax base, we'll not solve the problem. And I think, building on the non-residential side, and very specifically industrial development, and the industrial action plan is something I very proudly supported. I want to activate, I want to attract those opportunities. I don't want us to lose out to the region. I don't think anybody does. I think now we have a plan to move forward on that. And I think I can bring some of my experience I've had with the Edmonton Research Park, which is a medium-sized industrial park, to the table as well. And then finally, you talk about dynamics on council. We make decisions very differently from the legislature and the parliament. And this is why I believe independence is hugely important. I can't actually imagine what will happen when party politics does get introduced. If it's a minority, it's a majority. Are we only going to get along with people within the caucus? How is caucus meeting going to even happen? I think it's hugely problematic. Nobody asked for this. Nobody even ran on an election, provincial election on this platform. But here we are. And I think, I believe in independence and being accountable to the people who voted me here, who got me here. And that's why I talk about the variety of methods of outreach. And so I think that's why, I think moving forward, I will remain that independent voice, and finding other ways of building consensus and collaborating, which I have done very successfully in the last 4 years, to see motions and progress moving forward. And I'm really sorry. I actually have a hard stop in a few minutes. And so, I really appreciate this opportunity to share my perspective.
Can I ask you one more question before you scoot out?
Sure.
Okay. So have you been hearing from people who are critical about anything that you've done? And what is that? And what are you planning to do about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I'm meeting people who are very fearful of some of the changes around the zoning bylaw. I will also say I hear probably just as much feedback about the brown bag drive-through fees as I do about infill as well. So again, the single-use bylaw was something I did support. And so I think those are not feedback we ignore. I sit on the utility committee. We hear feedback and we're figuring out how do we address those concerns. What additional information do we need to get and what adjustment do we need to make in the policy? I think the answer isn't, especially in the world we're living in, as we're facing with climate, housing, financial, tariff, global trade, lots of uncertainties. I don't think the answer is to do away with nothing, to start from scratch, because I think that's going backwards, and I don't want our city to go backwards. I want us to move forward with thought, with care, with adjustment, and I am here for that.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Moving to Jyoti, I just wanted to ask you, what are the key things that you think the council could have done better over the last term? And what are the things that you are planning as your key priorities if you get selected for your ward?
I think when it comes to affordable housing, the council did have a chance to vote 8-plex to 6-plex, and I see a failure in that. I feel that should have been 6-plexes because 8-plex middle housing is a problem for a lot of residents, especially in areas where the parking isn't sustainable for that. The neighborhood doesn't have the services to sustain that, and the residents weren't well engaged on that. So I think that does look like a big failure in that sense to me. And other things could be property taxes. They went up all at once, in just 8%, over 8% this year all at once. And it was hard on everyday people, especially for seniors. I've had seniors say to me that if it continues in this direction, I can't continue to live in my home. So I felt that was a lot all at once, for it to jump that high. And another thing is the safety on transit, LRT. It's just not as safe as it was when I was taking the transit to go to school. I could, take a bus and then the train, and I felt safe doing that, switching a few times. And even after 7 p.m., I felt safe doing that back when I went to university. I have a student that volunteers with me, and she refuses to take the train to summer school now. And she says that she just doesn't feel it's clean, it's safe, it's accessible for her. So this is what I'm hearing. And I think that those are some of the key things that I think could be improved immensely. We could have much there's a lot to do there. These are core services. They should be safe, accessible to use, and it's just not that way right now.
Okay, so how do you think you can improve the safety?
Safety in general, I think it's linked to the mental health crisis that we do have going on all around the city, especially in the downtown core. So having good programs for houselessness, for homelessness, and providing them with what they need, and that all ties into safety, right? Because it all trickles into, it's all connected. So, for example, Indigenous-led accountability supports, and being inclusive of that. When you look at the mental health crisis, if someone that is going through homelessness and they end up in jail or they end up in the hospital, ensuring that they don't end up right back onto the street, that there is bridge housing available, these kind of services, bridge housing close to LRT, bridge housing close to transit centers, shelters that meet people where they're at. So if it's youth or pregnant women or someone with a pet, having those kind of resources available. And I think working on wraparound services, all of these kind of things, it all ties into better programs for those that are in need, that are homeless, and I think that ties into safety. It's all connected.
Thank you. Jason, if you get selected in your ward, what are the things that are going to be priority for you for this term, and how would you make that happen?
So my first priority is putting forward an amendment to amend the zoning bylaw, and I've put where my starting position is, because I don't want to make the decision all myself. I want to work with whoever else is elected on council to see what they're hearing in their neighborhoods and what they'd like to see. And then it's getting the budget. So the outgoing council does the first year budget for the incoming council, because the incoming council only has about 5 weeks to address it. Now this council is leaving us with, I believe it's around 6.5% tax increase. Now that's just unsustainable with how it's been compounding on the previous one. So I'm looking to ask for more details on those budgeting process to see maybe where there is inefficiencies. And ultimately, that's questions that this council should have been asking back at the previous 4-year budget cycle. But I mean, I understand we had 8 new councillors that have that year or so learning curve, and they may not have known back then to ask those questions that are now coming to importance today of where are those efficiencies. I don't want to start recklessly cutting the budget. I want to know where the dollars are actually going, line by line of every budget of every department. So that's one of my priorities, and just try and address the incoming tax increase as best as possible. I don't know what that's going to look like until we actually get in there and start seeing what the numbers tell us.
Perfect. Now, the last question to both of you would be, so I'll move to Jyoti first. Is there something that you want to tell the audiences who are watching you right now as a closing remark?
Yes, I think our city needs to be healthier, more vibrant. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we need to engage better and listen better to people. It is the taxpayers' dollars that is being used to provide all these services, but we're not engaging well at all. When I went to where I've tried to do my door knocking in a way where I've hit different parts of the ward. So every day I'll go to a different area. I don't want to leave anybody out, and each community has their own grievances, and I'm trying to get an idea of that. And I think that there's a lot of things that could be done to show that we are listening to the person that voted us in. And I don't think that's been happening. We haven't engaged. The last council hasn't engaged well, hasn't listened well, and their decisions are showing this, right? So safety starts from creating an environment of pride. Let's clean up our LRT to make sure that it's, if there is cleaned up quickly, and there are some social responsibilities that are lacking, and I think that we could be more inclusive, more accessible, more equitable in our decision making, and just overall just listening to people better. That's the number one thing.
Thank you. And Jason, is there some final remarks that you want to make to?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that on October 20th, change is coming one way or another. Do you want to change the look of your community, or do you want to change the look or the person that's holding that council seat representing you? Do you want to change your taxes up, or do you want to change your taxes down? Do you want to change your crime rate up? Do you want to change your crime rate down? Do you want these are the kind of things that I think are important, because, like I said, change is coming one way or another, and we're in such a dire situation from this council that we need people with the right experience to get in there and tackle issues starting on day one, so that we can resolve issues before it's gone too far.
I want to thank you both for your time, and Karen in absentia right now, for coming together to talk about all the issues that Karhiio is facing and how you're going to deal with them. So thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to the election that's coming up quickly. So all the best to both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunities.
Thank you very much, Mary.
Thank you.